Nova, how are you, my friend?
Doing well, Evan. Thanks.
Great,
Well,
great. Well, I hope you are as excited as I am to be joined by what looks like a fairly good number of people for today's kit. This is our first ever Master of the World portfolio tasting that we're doing.
nice.
And I can't imagine doing it with a better group of friends and colleagues as yourself and Rob McNeil, who I'll be introducing in a couple of minutes. This particular tasting is near and dear to my heart, as we will learn momentarily. Foppiano is a near and dear place to us, and I want to give a big fat thank you for their hospitality. Now, a lot of you who are out there, good afternoon for those of you who are in my time zone and beyond, and good evening for those of you to whom dinner is fast approaching. I think it's important that I clarify that first. Not only do we like their hospitality, and Jeremy and the whole team when we come up and visit, but we actually work Master of the World, as Nova knows quite well, out of the winery. And we couldn't think of a better, more helpful, enthusiastic, and hospitable team. So it really is very emotionally important to me that we're doing it here. So let's just talk a little bit about what's going on. I'm sure a couple of you have actually gone on to the Master of the World website. And hopefully when you registered and done, you put your kit number in. And where you pop the kit number in, it gives you an opportunity to pick if you're going to do a full workout, which we're going to talk about with wine 6, a quick pick, which we're going to talk a little bit more about with wine 5, or not, which you could do for the first 4 wines as well too. For those of you who are feeling particularly competitive today, you'll notice that right under the kit number and all of that when you're registering it in, it asks if you want to join a leaderboard. Now, for leaderboards, for those of you like video game and stuff like that, you'll know that that shows you how you're doing compared to your other fellow players. So if you enter the code CWC272 rather, and you're following along like everybody else today, you might be able to enjoy that too. Rob, I'm going to introduce Rob McNeil. Rob is the general manager of Foppiano Winery. Rob is a near and dear friend to us because of that, but few people know that Rob and I actually went to grammar school together back in the day. I believe I was in kindergarten and he was in first or second grade.
I was in third grade.
Third grade. So we
Yeah.
go back a long, long time. Not as far back as Foppiano goes, which is celebrating 125 years. Rob, you want to tell us a little bit about that
That's the
and the
historical
winery?
factoid of the day, where this is our 125th anniversary as that Giovanni Foppiano bought this ranch. It was actually an acting vineyard and winery in 1896 when the Foppiano family purchased it. And we're still standing after 125 years. And we are one of the longest continually run family wineries in the industry. And our president and vineyard manager, Paul Foppiano, 5th generation, couldn't be here this afternoon, but he is grateful and thankful, as myself and the rest of the staff, for your support with being a participant in this MTW session, because it given us the opportunity to teach you about Foppiano. And we were once, say, a big fish in a small pond back in the day, and now we're one of hundreds of wineries just within Sonoma County. And we've been quietly making good wine for a number of years, and we're in the last, I would say, 6 or 7 years, we're coming out of maybe a little bit of a hibernating period, and it's a rediscovery. And we've got the transition from the 5th generation to the 4th generation to the 5th generation, that being Paul. We have Nova, who joined us 7 years ago and is making the best wines we've ever had. Paul's hands-on in the vineyard, and it's all been coming together. And MTW, Master of the World, is part of that. So, but anyway, just let me finish up a little bit more on the history. So we had first generation buy this ranch in 1896, and we are located 5 minutes south from the Healdsburg Square. And somebody years ago walked the ground and found this soil that's on our ranch that you can't find to the north, to the west, or the east. There's just a little blob of it to the south, this really nice gravelly loam. And planted a vineyard to Petit Syrah, Carignan, and Zinfandel. And then second generation bought the winery from his father in the early 1900s. And there's a picture, the one on the left on the PowerPoint is the picture of the second generation and his kids. And one of his kids became the third generation. Louis J. Foppiano is really the true patriarch historically with the Foppianos. He ran the winery in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and was best friends with the Sebastianis and the Gallos. And he was one of those Italian founders in Sonoma County. And he was one of the founding members of the Wine Institute, California Wine Institute. He was on the forefront and led the charge for Russian River to be approved as an AVA by the then BATF, which is cool. And then he had children, and we had Louis M. Foppiano, fourth generation, who is our current chairman of the board, ran the winery for about 20 years, and now it's handed to his nephew, Paul Foppiano. So there's a fun photograph going back to this picture that you guys are looking at. The one in the middle is a great one because, you know, at Foppiano, we can say we made wine before, during, and after Prohibition. And that one in the middle is right smack in the middle, 1926. So you're 7 years into Prohibition with another 6 or 7 to go. And this photo was taken right out in front of the winery. And the kid with the derby cap sitting in the forefront on the left side of the picture is Louis J. Foppiano when he was 16. The gentleman standing with a hat is a federal agent. There's a second one that's kind of ducking out of the photograph right next to that guy. And they're draining the winery of close to 100,000 gallons of a red blend. And there's some locals drinking some wine, sitting next to that standing agent. And there's a couple guys passed out on the other side. So it's a fun photo. And so there's a lot of history of our property and our winery. And if any of you ever get a chance to come and visit, please do. It's like we're a little bit of a time capsule. You do not have to make an appointment. You can show up spontaneously with food. We have picnic tables. It's very relaxed and we're not overcrowded. And it's just a nice, charming, kind of an antique ambiance when you come here. So that's enough for history for now. I'm going to let Nova and Evan run the show with the wine tasting, and it's going to be a good one because it specializes in some, very small amount wines that are our top wines that we make in very small amounts. And I think you'll get a kick out of these wines. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. Thank you for that. So now let me talk a little bit about blind tasting. A blind tasting is not about throwing a blindfold around your head and then trying to figure out what it is. But blind tasting is a way, which is to say that most significantly, you don't get to stare at the label and understand what the wine is before you try it. So we go in and we evaluate the wines by basically 3 primary characteristics and then move into the 4th. So all wines need to be looked at, and that's not just to be pretentious and cool, but we do look at wines to sort of evaluate their color, evaluate their clarity, evaluate their brightness. All that's about sound winemaking. We smell and taste the wines, and that's probably the most important element and the most pleasurable for everybody. We, as you'll see later on when we do our Master of the World Format 4 tasting, actually conflate aroma and flavor together because they're directly related. All it takes is a bad head cold or allergies to know that when you can't smell, you can't taste. So we go through that and people look and they evaluate flavors of fruits and earths and vegetables and all sorts of other things like that. And then you taste them, and the tasting is essentially more often than not an echoing of what you smell because your nose is a lot more powerful than your mouth is. But what your mouth is very good at doing is deducing structure, which is to say the architectural elements that wines are made up of acids and oaks and alcohols and sugars and things like that we'll talk about later. And then ultimately, for really good people who would take blind tasting very seriously, they will then take all that information. Think about it like the game of Clue. Your goal is ultimately Colonel Mustard in the dining room with the candlestick, right? So they'll take a look at all the clues. What am I looking at? What am I smelling? What am I tasting? How is the wine structured? And then they'll try and deduce, discern, and above all, enjoy everything. Deduction on where it's from, what grape variety it might be made from, what year it might be made from. And that's why we do it. So that's the whole concept of blind tasting, as opposed to tasting when you're looking at the label and you're really just trying to validate that what it says on the label and what it doesn't say. Nova, you have any specific thoughts on blind tasting you want to share?
Blind tasting is, it's, for me, as I'm not involved in the sommelier world per se. I wouldn't say I'm particularly good at identifying the details that would bring me to a region or vintage or anything like that. But that doesn't mean that using the techniques isn't important. See, what happens in the winery is, and this is a conversation that could go on forever because it's so interesting. The whole concept of a bias. For me, I want to make the best wine we can, right, with the fruit we're given. That's a no-brainer. But for me, and I was thinking about this topic before we went on, and when I've got a idea in mind for a blend, if I think to myself, you know what, I would really love it if these two wines tasted better together than without. And so you kind of will yourself to believe that. So you taste the wines, and if you know what's what, you can say, oh, I think I really do like the blend that I came up with the other day. I think, yeah, I'm pretty good at this. You got to eliminate that. You got to be able to say, okay, here's 3 wines, and tasting with other people is great because you'll get honest feedback on the blends, and you don't know what they are other than that you're say, for example, you're making the Pinot blend for the year or something like that, or whatever. It's Pinot Noir. Which one do you like best? And you would just be shocked at how often the one that most prefer is the one that potentially you least expect. So there's some real magic there. So you can find the best wine you never would have got there, and just think the whole world would never have tasted that great wine that came about by accident. So it just goes to show how challenging it is to put it together, because it's very hard to trick yourself, and especially if you're working alone, you've got to find a clever way to make it blind for yourself. And but it just really is critical to find the best wine. The best wine is out there, but you got to try and find it. And blind tasting is one of the ways.
Yeah, I think it's important because we talked about this last week when I was up there, but the whole concept of blind tasting really reinforces objectivity and reinforces, to your point, lack of bias. I always tell people, when we do tasting groups and such, that a glance at the label is worth 30 years of experience. It's easy to like something if you know you're supposed to and what it is. It's also easy to not if you've got some sort of prejudice. So rather than, I think, talking about it, I think we should go ahead and do it. Our spoiler alert is this. So in classic blind tasting, when you're getting, for example, a regular Master of the World kit, not all of the wines, the 6 that you get in your box, are going to come from the same place, the same country, et cetera, et cetera. So that adds a little added complexity note to everyone at the end, because once they look at it, smell it, taste it, and talk about it, they're going to then have to sort of decide what grape it's made from, where they think it's from, and then be more specific on it. Well, we know, in this case, nod, nod, wink, wink, that all of our wines are coming off of the Foppiano estate and coming from a single terroir, that being the Russian River Valley, which Rob alluded to, is now an AVA and encompasses a good chunk of land and a lot of growers throughout the area. And while it's known for a couple of grapes, most notably, as all of you fans of Foppiano know, the delicious Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs and Zins there are other grapes that are made there as well too, and we'll be exploring some of them today. So what we are going to do, now that I've got my spoiler alert out, is we're going to go into a little conversation. So with each wine, we're going to start with glass number 1. We're going to go through the wine together, and I'm going to ask Nova to sort of kick things off for us. So he's going to actually take a look at the wine, smell it, talk about it, not tell you what it is. That would be kind of not cool in a blind tasting, but what his observations are. And then I'm going to jump in there and throw out a couple of comments as well too. Then we're going to throw up one of these polls I alluded to, allow each of you to then select which of the grapes you think it might be. Then we'll reveal it, talk about it for another minute, and then we'll repeat this process over and over. So you've got your first glass of wine. I know I do as well too, Nova. What are you seeing, smelling, and tasting here?
Well, you know, for this wine, it's fun. It's fortunate we have, we're starting with this one because aromatically, what's jumping out is very clear, right? You know, if I was doing a blind tasting, if this was blind, for most of the folks here it is, but I happen to know what this is. The aromas you're getting, what are they rich and full and honey and oaky, or are they crisp and clean and refreshing and lemon lime? Early aromatic expressions like that often give me the first clues, obviously, but some of the most important clues to where the wine is going. In this case, I do get a lot of lemon lime, fresh cut grass, some richness, honeysuckle kind of, but all on the more refreshing side of the aromatic spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm noticing first off, right off the bat, when I look at it, you know, one of the things we didn't really talk about, but obviously different wines have different colors. And even within the smaller spectrum of white wines, certain wines have really deep, rich, darker, more yellow, golden colors. Some of them are lighter and more towards the straw side. Once you become more familiar with grapes, you'll understand which grapes show those, which don't, which might have spent time being aged in certain ways, which don't. So that was one of the things that jumped off the bat. I concur with you on the smells and actually ditto in the flavors. But you're going to find in general that wines that come from, you know, California, in this case, the Russian River, are going to be fairly fruit forward. We're blessed to be able to ripen our fruit nicely. So that's usually the first types of things I look for in these wines. And I concur with you about the citrus elements, the lime, the lemon. There's almost like a pink grapefruity sort of character that I'm picking up there, adding sort of a ripeness and almost not a sweetness per se, but really a ripeness there, but a wonderful angularity in palate, nice brightness, sharp, refreshing, zesty acidities.
Yeah, I think that angularity, or you know, the zesty acidic character, that string, that linearity to it, is another great clue because it tells you right away. Okay, this is a white wine. It's got a touch of acid. It's very, you know, the acid, that backbone of the city, really stands out. And another clue, like, this varietal is known for that characteristic. Mm-hmm. So already you're starting to, you know, paint a picture in your mind. Okay, aromatics are very fresh. There's no evidence of aged in barrel, for example. Like Evan was saying, there's no straw color. There's no exposure to oak, which can often make a wine slightly darker, a white wine slightly darker in color. Mm-hmm. And now in the palate, it's very fresh, very, very fresh. And so, again, you're putting these clues together. You're thinking, well, this wine, it must have been harvested at a relatively low sugar, which would give you the higher acid. This is a wine that doesn't have a lot of color. It's very, very almost a clear white wine, that, you know, on the maybe even a greenish tint, which is a very youthful kind of color. So you're thinking, oh, this wine must have been bottled right out of the gate, perhaps right after fermentation.
Absolutely. So let's do this, Nova, while we're now that people are starting to think. You've got 4 choices there to pick from as a person in the audience there. So your choices are Chardonnay, Semillon, Viognier, and Sauvignon Blanc. Now, to the degree that you have familiarity with those varieties, do a process of elimination in your brain. For those of you who don't, guess what the hell? Why not have some fun with it? And then we're going to give you about another 30 seconds, and not even, maybe about 15 seconds. There are only 4 choices, and we're going to go ahead and show you what that wine is. Then we're going to circle back around it, point out a couple of markers that helped us get there, and then we'll move on to the next wine. So I'm going to go ahead and close up the poll right now, and we're going to go ahead and post those results. So, wow, Nova, it looks like most everybody thought it was Sauvignon Blanc, a couple of Viogniers, no Semillons, one or two Chardonnays, but maybe you talked them out of it there at the end. And Viognier being super aromatic, maybe that's why a couple of people went there. So let's go ahead and reveal what this wine is now. And this wine is, in fact, drum roll please, Sauvignon Blanc, Russian River Valley, your estate 2019. And what to you, in your mind's eye, Nova, what are the sort of 3 or 4 key things people should always be looking out for in Sauvignon Blanc, and most specifically in Russian River Sauvignon Blanc?
Yeah, I mean, the characteristics, in my perception, that make Sauvignon Blanc unique and, you know, fairly easy to spot in a lineup. You know, that's easy for me to say because I drink wines of all types. So, but again, you're looking for freshness in aroma and color. You're looking for some form of acid generally in the palate, and flavors that remind you of fresh, you know, acidic fruits, talking lemon, lime, and things like that. You're often going to get clued in, you know, when a wine is very, very rich in aromas and rich in the palate, you will probably steer yourself away from a Sauvignon Blanc as far as a guess to what it might be. But those are the main ones that I look for. I look for youthful color, fresh aromas, fresh flavors.
Yeah, I would concur with that. I think what the citric family of fruits tend to be those that we find most. So as you said, the lemons, the lime, grapefruit for Russian River is a real classic one that I find. And because where you are in that sort of more eastern part of the Russian River, it tends to be riper. So it's more pink grapefruit than it is that yellow grapefruit. And again, that sort of backbone of wonderful acidity. This is a real classic example of what Russian River Sauvignon Blanc is all about. All right, people, now you got a little sense of what we're doing here. Let's move on to our second wine. So, Noah, if you want to grab your glass there, I'm going to grab mine. First thing I note, we're no longer in the land of whites, right? We're in the land of reds. So let's go ahead and take a look at this wine. Maybe look at it purely at this point alongside some of the other wines you might have poured to see how the color difference, and then smell and taste it. And we'll go for the poll after that. So, Nova, what strikes you about this wine when you look at it and smell it?
What's great is the cues, the 1, 2, 3, 4 list that you've got. With this particular wine, sight can be a very valuable clue. This particular varietal, compared to the other ones, for example, in the glasses, should appear a bit lighter in color. And if that's not a dead giveaway, which it's not necessarily is, because there's nothing wrong with a wine of lighter color in the spectrum. Doesn't mean it's less flavorful. It can be frowned upon by, you know, people who are expecting a very dark wine. But what you're looking for in this one is sight is going to be clue number 1, and then aromatics should be number 2, obviously, according to the list. But again, this particular wine, and I've got to be careful not to say what it is because it's so
kill the purpose, right?
It's so easy to say that. You're looking for I'm going to put myself in a blind tasting situation. So what I'm getting, I'm not getting jamminess. I'm not getting any vegetable characteristics, any green pepper. I'm getting some, you know, forest floor type thing or mushroom, but also some cherry, dark cherry cola kind of aromatics. And already I'm starting to move around because those other aromatics that I just mentioned are usually attached with other varietals like Zinfandel and Cabernet Sauvignon, but forest floor and cherries, those are aromatics that are linked with a different varietal.
Yeah, I'll tell you what's also another thing, and I always sort of, as I'm reminding myself in my mind's eye as I'm tasting, I always tell people to look for a few things in a wine. FEW. F is for fruit, E is for earth, W is for wood. And if you remember to keep that little lexicon in your brain, you can work that way. So first of all, the sight thing really quickly, you're absolutely right. And if anyone's looking across here, this one is a much lighter, less saturated color than the others are. Usually wines taste like or act like they look. So it's probably coming from a thinner skinned grape from generally cooler areas that will give you that sort of stuff. But it's also going to smell more like if it looks more red as opposed to sort of dark and black like some of the others, it's probably going to taste more red. So the fruit elements here, I concur with you. They're cherries and raspberries and strawberries or pomegranates, whatever speaks to you in terms of that. I concur with you on that sort of earthy, forest flory, slight mushroomy character. And then the wood there is giving me, in this case, I'm picking up some wood, some elements of spice, some elements of slightly toasty things going on there. Brightness, once again, in the palate, not a huge amount of pull or rip at the side of my mouth, which we'll talk about later. So people's brains start thinking, your own familiarity start thinking. We're going to give you another 4 grapes to pick from here. Your choices now, as the poll pops up, are going to be Merlot, a grape that we all know and love, made famous by Miles and Sideways, but famous even before then. Pinot Noir, which we all love, Syrah, and Carignan. So those are 4 very different grapes. And again, hopefully based on some tasting experience, maybe even earlier vintages of the Foppiano releases here, your own, start to select the wine. Remember here that this is a completely anonymous poll. So put yourself out there. Don't feel bad about it. I'm gonna give you just a couple more seconds. You only have 4 choices, and then we're gonna pop the results up. So let's close that poll. Let's put the results out here. And let's see what we got. Well, Pinot Noir, 8 out of 10 people have it. And 8 out of 10 people. Let's go ahead and pop up what it actually is. 8 out of 10 people. I'm going to lead the witness here and say 8 out of 10 people are right. What do you think, Nova?
Yeah, I think so. This is it's following the rules pretty much of for a blind tasting point of view. I think it's got the lighter color. It's got some of the lighter characteristics, lighter red wine characteristics, all coming through very elegantly. And those are kind of classic Pinot Noir. One thing too, I thought of while you were talking, Evan, was structure of a wine. So you can have wines that are tactily different. So you'll get tannin experience, a rougher kind of pleasant, but rougher finishes sometimes in some of the more bold reds. Pinot Noir is generally going to be very, very soft. So that is if you were on the fence with a wine, Merlots can be very supple, so that wouldn't have been a bad guess necessarily. They can be very supple and soft, but if between 2 wines, if one is coming across smooth all the way through, it's lighter in body and it's color, and it's got these aromatics, and it's got a very, very soft finish, then you're probably tasting a Pinot Noir.
Yeah, I would concur. And just to address the issues, so the tannin is right. The tannin in and of itself is probably why you would boot out Syrah immediately, and probably why you would boot out Carignan as well too. Carignan sits in that redder fruit vein, but it tends to be a more grippier, slightly grittier wine. The texture of the tannins of Merlot are probably closest to Pinot Noir, but it is that sort of wonderful backbone of both acidity and all of those sort of spicy characters. Because Merlot is not a grape I would ever really describe as being spicy. Creamy, yes. Full flavored, yes. Dark fruit, yes. But this is red fruit and it's spicy. It's got bright acid and it's got soft tannins. So that's probably where I'd move there. So hopefully people are enjoying getting the groove there. Let's move into our 3rd glass now. And right off the bat, it looks really different. And it smells really different. So Nova, you're our superstar here on tasting and talking about your own wines. What are you getting and seeing in this wine, perhaps vis-a-vis, even comparatively against the Pinot Noir, but also independently about what's going on in the glass?
This wine, right off the bat, the aromatics are very intriguing. Even as a winemaker, if I were to get this, I'd be like, whoa, what's going on here? I like it. So I'm getting some dried herb type aromatics, and I'm gonna throw this out there to the group that I'm gonna be surprised if more than half the people get this one. I think this is gonna be actually from here on out, I'm gonna be impressed if people start nailing these, because first one, not too bad. Second one followed with Pinot Noir, seems logical. Now
Training wheels, my friend.
now we're into a new range of reds, and this is going to be start reflecting our estate as how we produce these varietals. So they're going to be representative, certainly, of what they should taste like, and it's going to be an excellent exercise for everybody to try and nail these.
Absolutely. So what I'm noticing right off the bat is we're starting to move into a new zone of colors, and the colors are getting darker, and I think might even continue to get darker as we move through the balance of the wines. The fruit, there's sort of a power and an explosiveness coming out of the nose on this wine, whereas the Pinot Noir was quite evident, but it wasn't sort of boom in there. Getting a nice combination of red and black fruit. So I'm getting, again, sort of a riper character of those red fruits I talked about before, but again, sort of some black cherries, some blackberries, some brambly sort of fruits in there as well too. I concur with you, there is sort of this wonderful herbal element of it, whether, what herbs you call it is probably up to you, but it's definitely a strong characteristic of what this wine is, along with the sort of earthier notes. And there is some wood here. I get a little bit too, but it's not like a big deal here. This is really more about the sort of fruit characters, first year, second, and the structure. The wine's is a bit more oomph to it as well too. So it is very, very, very different.
Definitely finishing strong. You can get that kind of little bit of a dusty tannin in the finish. Mm-hmm. There's definitely some spicy, some baking spice character in there, and this is a full-bodied red. So this is not over the top heavy duty, but we're moving away from Pinot Noir. We're moving into the range of, higher, a little bit more sunshine, a little bit riper fruit. Yeah. This wine is I think tasting really nice.
I absolutely concur with you. You've got 4 choices out there, people in Zoomlandia. Your choices could be Carignan, it could be Zinfandel, it could be Grenache, and it could be Sangiovese. So those are your 4 choices and 4 different votes. For those of you familiar with these wines, there's some shared commonalities across them. I saw somebody mention earlier a question on the chat about maceration time and what is extended maceration. That is allowing the skins to spend time with the wine, if you will, after it's fermented. The longer time you spend macerating, generally the darker the color is going to be, the more power you're going to get. The tannins will be more apparent, although they can also soften over time. So this wine would definitely have seen probably more post-fermentation maceration or extended maceration than the wine we just had. So let's go ahead and close the poll here, and let's see where people wound up. This is definitely a higher degree of difficulty, as they would say, in the grand scheme of things. It looks like Carignan beat out everybody, but there's a little bit of votes for Zin, a little bit of votes for Grenache, a little bit of votes for Sangiovese. And again, there is, one could sort of, for lack of better words, quote unquote, argue all 3 of those. Any thoughts before I throw in a couple of pointers on that, Nova, and we reveal the wine?
Again, I have the unfair advantage, of course, of being familiar with the wines and having the wines in front of me, the labels. That wine would be very difficult to taste blind compared to, a Zinfandel or a Grenache. Those could very easily lead you astray. I think Carignan is one of the most widely planted varietals in the entire world. A lot of France and Spain and some of Italy, I believe, are also. It's a fantastic grape for productivity, and it has a lot of flavor. It's a very versatile wine. But another part of it that makes it difficult to blind taste is that it is dictated greatly by its growing region. So you can get Russian River Valley Carignan that's grown closer to the ocean, further down the river. It's very acid driven, very linear, almost more like a Sangiovese, which would be higher acid, a little bit more food friendly, you could call it, a little bit lighter bodied. But where we are, we have the ample sunshine. So I wouldn't hold it against anybody if they didn't nail this one, 9 times out of 10, because it shares a lot of characteristics with other more popular varietals.
Yeah, and in fact, what's interesting to note here, let me just go through the other 3 real quickly, and then we'll reveal. Zinfandel and Carignan oftentimes can get confused because they're structurally quite similar, and oftentimes, as you know, they're planted together, right? A lot of people think of Zinfandel as being the sort of pure monolithic wine, but some of the best examples of it are what they call mixed blacks, which is to say you have Alicante Bouschet and Carignan and other grapes in there too, because they grow well together, but also they share characteristics. Zinfandel can be oftentimes confused for Carignan, although it usually tends to be a bit more oomphy, a little bit more alcoholic. Grenache can be that way too, but Grenache tends to be much more purely sort of sweet red fruited, and tannin wise, it's creamier and not quite as hard as what we've got in our glass. Sangiovese, spicy, high acid. If anything, I'd say closer to Pinot in many respects, and certainly not the color, but it has sort of an interesting sort of spicy and almost at times sort of coffee-ish kind of aroma. So let's see what we actually have here. And the reveal on this wine is a Carignan. Mine's slow. It's not coming on my screen right away, but it is the Carignan. And what sort of, again, are your couple of quick markers here in the future for when people are thinking of trying Carignans? To your point, grown in France, grown in Chile and the Maule, grown in parts of Italy. What should people be looking for?
I think Carignan, when that little chart we had with the different varietals that are somewhat similar, Zinfandel and Grenache, I think with Carignan, you're going to look for aromatics that are not purely fruit. So you're going to have a lot of fruit, but you're also going to have spices and spices, dried herbs, things like that. And you'll have ample fruit, and you'll have, kind of a texturally strong finish. Zinfandel is not necessarily going to give you a lot of dried herbs aromatically, and Grenache is not necessarily going to give you the tannin. And again, very difficult to nail it 9 times out of 10, but that, I would stick with kind of those unique aromatics matched with a very big fruity mid palate with a little bit of a dusty finish. You can say that might be a Carignan.
And speak to us a little bit. I also, as a grape, we've been talking about that FEW thing. Where does the wood fit in? Carignan to me is a grape that I don't for lack of better words, over oak or over wood, because the purity of fruit and the other flavors there are so strong that you don't want to overwhelm it with too much oak. What's your oak here, and what are your thoughts on oak with Carignan?
Yeah, Carignan is an interesting one because what we use is it's traditionally called a Hungarian oak. Hungarian oak is the same species of oak that grows in France. The more famous, the most famous oak tree, oak varietal, but same species, but grown in Hungary and Northern Europe in general now. What it does is it brings in a little bit more of the spicy character. So oak from France is very elegant, very pure oak flavor, like you'd expect it. If you were to make a tea with oak, and you'd be like, that's what oak tastes like. Very elegant and tasty, and smells beautifully toasted, like marshmallows and things. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hungarian oak is a bit spicier, a bit more cinnamon, a bit more ups and downs in there, and it really pairs well with an interesting varietal like Carignan, because again, Carignan's got that really interesting aromatic profile that's got some herbs and spices. And then with that dusty finish that I mentioned, it's going to be a little bit better match than just a pure elegant marshmallow oak.
Got it. I'm a big fan of Carignan, for people who know me know I drink a lot of it. I'm a particularly fan of the stuff that comes out of not only Northern California but also Chile, and I like it because it's great. Both by itself. I mean, you could actually drink this wine. It's a bigger wine, but it's a really good food wine too. And I noticed somebody asked a question about food pairings on this. Its rusticity by character and its sort of boldness lends it well to a lot of grilled foods. I find it works well with a lot of what I call sort of one pot meals. So could be anything from chile to cassoulet to things like that. Things are a little bit heartier and richer and more flavorful. You could do, riper, or should I say bigger dishes and things like that. Carignan's acid and again tannins will hold up quite well with it. So this moves us on to the fourth wine. You see in advance what the grape choices are, but don't worry about those yet. Let's go ahead and just talk through it and taste it as well too, and we'll go from there.
So right away, I mean, just getting going with the idea, looking at the color, we're not on the super dark end of the spectrum quite yet. So from my point of view anyways, so keep that in mind when you're starting to, isolate different varietals. Definitely aromatically, it's got a really strong density.
Yep.
As you swirl it more and more, and again, if you were doing if you needed more clues from a wine and you feel like you weren't getting what you needed, swirling a wine like this. So what you're doing is kind of introducing oxygen into the wine itself. You're shaking it around, so that's volatilizing a lot of those aromatic compounds. And the more air and aeration you get in there, and the more volatilization, the more little clues will start to come out. A wine will open up. We've probably all heard that term many times. People have used decanters and the like to achieve this goal. But the more I swirl this wine, the more I'm starting to get more of like grape jelly, ripe blackberries, purple raspberry kind of aromatics. It almost wants to smell like there's some non-fruit kind of aromas in there, but once you keep on going, I think we're really purely in a fruit zone.
Yeah, I would concur with you. I mean, and I think, first of all, it's a spot on observation you make with respect to the color and how we're moving across that rainbow from lighter to darker. And then towards the end there, it's going to get really dark in just a couple of minutes. The first thing that strikes me about this wine is it's just, if I could use an onomatopoetic word, it's just oozing with fruit. It's got that whole spectrum of black and blue fruits as well, too. There's like almost a blueberry jam or a cobbler-like character that you're getting here on top of the blackberries and all of that sort of brambly character fruit. I find some red fruit true there, but it's definitely more black dominated, but you could almost get sort of like a really ripe raspberry or strawberry, almost, don't take this the wrong way, but almost like a fruit leather type character to it, underlining that dark fruit there. I think there's some elements to it. It doesn't have what I would call the sort of stronger herbal elements that you talked about before, but there are other earth elements there and sort of rich, almost like potting soil type things. The structure in the mouth is quite generous, I noticed on this wine as well too.
Yeah, big fat mid palate. That's one of the hallmarks of this varietal, big fat mid palate. And it's really just fruit on fruit on fruit on fruit with a little fruit leather and a little bit of tar, and then some more fruit and more fruit. Those are characteristics that should lead you, in the long run, to the varietal that we're tasting right now.
Absolutely. So our poll is up once again, guys. You've got 4 choices. We've got Syrah once again, Cabernet Sauvignon, we've got Zinfandel, and we've got Malbec. So 4 very distinctive grapes, each with their own expressions, and very, very different as well too. Based on some of the descriptors that you heard us talk about and your own tasting experience, why don't you put a check mark in one of those boxes, and we're going to go ahead and see what it is. So the results are, interestingly, almost a third down the line, with the one not being chosen being Cabernet. And I think probably right off the bat, for a lot of people, and remembering for people that Syrah and Shiraz can be synonymous, and if you've had a lot of Australian Shiraz, you know that they're not all big and hard, but Cabernet's tannins seem to be missing from this wine and probably steered a lot of people there. But the Zinfandel Malbec thing seemed to jump back and forth. I will tell you, a bit of a spoiler alert, that Malbecs tend to be, first of all, both super inky in color, almost sort of this vibrant phosphorescent type purpley color. And also they tend to be very floral. And while not to say this wine doesn't have floral elements in it, it's literally like sticking your nose in violets and dark fruit and everything there. So it's probably not singing enough from me there. Any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting poll. I think this goes to show that we're in a zone where the varietals are, they're getting showing true to character, but this is our estate speaking. So I really like, in a way, I really like the way that it's kind of going across bounds. And I could see, some Malbecs very much are of this style. You're right, they generally don't have the depth, the dark kind of dense in aroma and palate that this wine has. And this could, someone, if this was blind, I could be convinced that that was a Syrah too. It's not, and there's no wrong answers here. Fortunately, this is it's an eye opener for me, even, and for other people, that this are the way wines taste. It's so intriguing the way that different varietals perform differently from different regions. It's very interesting.
Absolutely. And as the result comes up here, I think it's important to stress that, nobody gets out of bed and decides tomorrow they're going to be a master sommelier. You get better at tasting the more you do of it. And one of the things that I hope and would encourage everyone out of here is not only to keep trying, but also relative tastings like we're doing here. We're tasting 6 different wines side by side. So they're all sort of different. And what you start to do is be able to learn the differences and the nuances that make one specific variety or style make it different from the other. I do concur that, as Nova said, because you're off of one terroir, you're going to get a lot of the vineyard character in all the wines. So to the extent that certain grapes are more alike than not alike, you'll get that vineyard patina over the top of them, showing it as well. So this wine, in fact, is a Zinfandel. And to me, this is sort of very classic of not only Zinfandel, but of Russian River Zinfandel as well too. Zinfandel is probably one of the varieties that I think shows its place more than any other. So if you're in Alexander Valley or Dry Creek Valley or Amador County or Paso Robles, the Zinfandels in each area tend to have a different personality. Some are maybe more earth driven, some are more red fruit driven, some are more dark fruit driven. This one to me sort of shows the classicness of that sort of really brooding dark fruit character and ripe sweetness of fruit that I associate with the Russian River Valley.
Yeah, definitely the big fruit is generally a great giveaway for Zinfandel. It's such a user-friendly wine in that regard. It's so easy to enjoy Zinfandel because usually it has ample fruit. It's got soft finish. It's a wine that is very easy to approach, regardless of how advanced your palate is. It makes it a lot of fun. But that's the thing. It's the heavy fruit, and Zinfandel has actually, I think, come a long way. I mean, Zinfandel has been the workhorse for Northern California viticulture for well over 100 years, 150 years. So they've tried every form of Zinfandel, including white Zinfandel. When you really get, when you bolt yourself down and really look at how to get the best out of the varietal, what you get is something like this, I believe, where it's very dense, high fruit content, good color, not over the top in any way, but just layers and layers and layers of fruit.
And we hear a lot, Nova, before we move on to wine number 5, about old vine Zinfandels. First of all, how old are these vines? Given the history that Rob alluded to earlier, I suspect we've got some vines that are old here. And really quickly, the importance of old vines for Zinfandel. Yeah,
well, our oldest vines are actually all Petite Syrah. This vineyard is considered kind of young for us, still almost 30 years old. But basically, we choose this wine. We have one block of Zinfandel, and what you're looking for is kind of vines that are struggling. So that's kind of a thing that gets tossed around all the time. The vines are trying to produce fruit that's going to be intriguing for animals to come and take the fruit and deposit the seed and continue the genetics of that particular vine. So if a vine is struggling, it's going to put a lot more energy into its fruit because maybe the vine thinks that it's this close to dying, you know what I mean? So this could be its last vintage, so it's going to give it everything it's got. And although that sounds a little bit cruel to the vine to trick it into this might be its last year, what you get is a really concentrated flavor profile year after year after year.
Got it.
And that's kind of what old vines are. Old vines have gone through so many decades of survival that often you get very, very unique, almost one of a kind per vineyard flavor profiles because the vines have become so much a part of the land that what they produce really is, the wine version of the climate they're in. And it's really a remarkable and a phenomenon that is just impossible to replicate unless you have the real thing.
Well stated. Very well stated. I hadn't thought about it that way. It's a great way of putting it. All right, guys, as we move on to wine five, I alluded to at the very beginning. For those of you who are online and you've been doing this, fabulous. For those of you who haven't and you want to, whether through these wines later on after the show, hopefully you haven't drank everything in all the bottles yet, or on a future kit if you want to come back and play with us later on. This is, as I mentioned, the quick pick. So if you log on and you go into the tasting box and you would enter your kit number, your choice would be Quick Picks or full workout, as you saw on the initial slide. Quick Picks gives you this. So if you're on it, go to wine five. And your choices here are quite simple. It's kind of like what we were doing. So grape is what we're picking here. But in our version, we'd also ask you to pick it was from the old world. And the old world is sort of Western and Central Europe, or the new world, which would be the Americas and everywhere else. At this level, we're not going to ask you, is it from California? Is it from Sonoma? Is it from the Russian River? That gets more into the full workout later on. And then we'd ask you to simply pick a year and then submit the wine at the bottom. So that's what we wanted to do. But let's go ahead and taste wine five now. And for those of you who want to play quick picks, you can. For those of you who don't, we're going to go through our usual poll in a moment. What are you finding here, Nova? Ooh, a little more, ooh, some different kind of oomph, huh?
Mm-hmm. So this wine's giving me, big burst right up front of kind of a very complex nose, fruit and herbs together. Very clean though, very clean. I really like the fact that it's, the characteristics are, even though it's very difficult to put a name on the specific aroma you're picking up, whether it's cherries or blackberries, just recognizing what you're smelling has an aroma that somewhere in your brain is recognizable is a great clue, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're smelling and you're like, is it fruit? Is it earth? Is it grass? If you can't put it in a general place, then it's very difficult to build on that. So smelling this wine, it's very upfront, very, very, very fruit forward, but very dark.
Mm-hmm.
It really has the characteristics that, make you want to take a sip.
Yeah, what I'm noticing right off the bat, it has a generosity, again, of fruit, to your point in the nose. It's structured very differently here. And this wine has, first of all, right off the bat in the aromas, both in the aromas and in the palate, there's more of a sort of rainbow of different sorts of flavors across the board. Yes, you've got the fruit. Yes, I'm getting some of that herbal character that we talked about before, which I associate with this part of the world as well too. Yes, I'm getting some other flavors. Yes, I'm getting an earthiness to it. Yes, I'm getting some wood elements there. So I'm getting kind of just a different, I don't want to say complex because the other wines are complex too, but it's a different sort of thing. I'm also getting some structure, getting a little bit of a pull on the sides of my mouth here structurally, again with ample acid, but bigger tannins, right?
Bigger tannins for sure. I think this wine is a fantastic example of what this region does with this varietal. Mm-hmm. So it showcases a lot of the characteristics you'd expect it to, and having the structured finish in the way, very clear, puckering in here, a very, very kind of a pleasant, brambly structure, dusty finish. Is very appropriate and something that I think is very representative of Russian River.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, you know the drill. Again, if you did this on Quick Picks, good on ya. You're just doing it here with the poll with us. Let's keep rocking and rolling. So our choices here are Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Petit Syrah. So once again, 4 different grapes, 4 different expressions of dark fruit. One right answer here. Hopefully you're sleuthing well. Our job here, once again, is Colonel Mustard with the candlestick in the conservatory type thing here. And let's go ahead and close out this poll and see what we got here. Well, most people, almost half, thought it was Cabernet Sauvignon. And then Cabernet Franc, and then Merlot came in last. So Merlot, I think we don't have where the tannins are probably a little bit too accentuated and a little bit too grippy to be Merlot. So I think for those people who didn't vote there, good on you. Franc tends to be, Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon are clearly related to each other. And in fact, Cabernet Franc is one of the parents of Cabernet Sauvignon along with Sauvignon Blanc. So there's a lot of similarity there. Cabernet Francs tend to share more of their herbal leafy side, whereas Cabernet Sauvignon will tend to have more fruit forward to it. I don't know how that works originally, but that's the way it worked. And Petit Syrah tends to be a big, chewy red wine. And although they're definitely reformist Petit Syrahs, can I say that, Nova, that are not as quite as extracted as there used to be, it tends to be a big wine regardless. So let's see what this wine is. And in fact, it is Cabernet Sauvignon. And talk a little bit, just really quickly before we jump into the last wine, Nova. Cabernet Sauvignon is something we associate with Dry Creek, Alexander Valley. We don't talk about it as much as we can or should with Russian River Valley. Just a quick thought.
Yeah, I agree. And I got an education in Cabernet coming here, I think, because I've worked in Dry Creek Valley, and, the Cabernet really seems to reward a lot of sunshine to make the type of Cabernet anyways that people kind of expect. But Cabernet is fantastically complex wine, I think. So, we're fortunate where we are in the Russian River Valley. We're right at the northern tip, as Rob mentioned. We have a soil profile, and we're also just south of downtown Healdsburg, which can get plenty warm. So we have the cooling influence of the river, but being in Russian River, of course, but we also have a lot of sunshine. So we're really in a perfect place where we can maintain the varietal character of Cabernet Sauvignon, which usually comes across a very complex nose, fruit flavors of one sort or another, usually, it's cedar and dry and herbs, and also maybe some green bean and bell pepper, things like that. Those are kind of aromatics that can grow on you. I've actually really learned to love a lot of some of those aromatics, even though they're not associated with riper Cabernets.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, you make me want to even get on and put my poster board thing on and walk around more Cabernet from Russian River. But I think that it's a shame that areas get so associated with singular varietals, and people forget just the range of grapes that do so well. I mean, obviously, you guys are a walking sandwich board for the diversity of the valley. I will say, and we can maybe talk about this at the end when we got a little bit more time after the last wine. 2017 vintage too. Nice help on that one to make it happen. So let's move to that last wine. And as I promised earlier, I wanted to just give you a little bit of insight into what you would get if you went into the full workout. So you would go in by and entering all the same data to get to the site. But instead of picking quick picks, you'd pick full sensory workout. You'd see the 6 wines across the top of your computer screen, and you would pick the individual wine. And then you'll notice that there's a series of drop-down bars that go through there on site: taste and aroma, structure, and your deductions, very much following the same template that Nova and I have been working with today. And what would have happened is that this wine would have been mapped out, or gridded, if you will, by 3 master sommeliers who would have gone through and made selections against the various categories that they could pick to literally give you the DNA and the specific descriptors that they found most associated with this wine. So while sight is a little bit, and structure, of course, is a little bit, you can see that the choices of flavors and aroma and taste are ample. And we always give you more than what we ask you to pick, so we're trying to be more generous. But it just goes to show you, and I think really true in a wine like glass number 6, as you're tasting it, see if any of these speak to you along the way. But our job in doing this is to not only show you what we found as people who drink a lot and taste a lot and evaluate a lot, but help you learn through, oh, I didn't see that, but now that I see it, I get it, kind of thing. Or, oh, I didn't pick up on the fact that you could have those flavors and these flavors there. Or notice on the structure, we note that, for some people, because our mouths are all different, some people might find the acid to be softer, medium. Somebody might find it to be a little sharper, medium plus. So we give you all that opportunity to play. But if this is not overwhelming for you, which I hope it's not, it's a really great way to sort of shift up in gears and really work to get your palate even more, for lack of better, trained than it is. So let's talk about wine 6 while people are staring at the myriad possibilities of descriptors. And right off the bat, I notice a very opaque glass sitting in front of me.
Yeah, that would be one of the giveaways for sure. And also, I want to point out how helpful these grids can be, because oftentimes what you'll do, especially when tasting several wines in a row, you'll start to find difficulty in attaching, like I mentioned earlier, attaching different descriptors to different experiences that you're having, sensory experiences with the wine, and just having clues so that you can kind of cement what you think it is actually really important. You know, it's not just a gimmick or anything like that. You really need to check boxes mentally to be able to put the wine in a certain category. And that's not just for serious wine tasters, it's anybody who's trying to really kind of get at what wine is about as an expressive beverage and a piece of art in a way.
Yeah. So as people are going through here, you know, we've done the favor for them. All the wines that you see here, a lot of the flavor descriptors that are popped out here are, I think, the same ones, you know, the plums, the strapping blackberries, the, you know, the huckleberries, the blue fruit, the really ripe, almost jammy characters on the reds, and the candy character on the reds, and all the structure elements. So this is a great wine to finish on too, by the way. I really, really like to finish this afterwards.
It's good. I mean, right off the bat, color, you know, one of the tricks I use is put a white sheet of paper behind the wine to really give a comparison, or if you have a white tabletop, something like that. This wine, again, getting back to the very beginning of our talk, the color that the wine has is going to give you at least 25% of what you need to know, in some cases, of where what the wine is. And so if you're dealing with a very, very dark wine like this, that's a great indicator of where you're headed.
Absolutely. Notice that as you look through your choices here, Pinot Noir is not on that list. So it's clearly a deep, dark, inky wine. Your choices here, everybody, are Petit Syrah, Malbec, Petit Verdot, another part of the Cabernet family that we didn't talk about, but very important spice element for those wines. And once again, Cabernet Franc. So pick a box. I see somebody saying our favorite, one of my favorites too. And go ahead and pick. Let's see where people panned out on this one. I'm going to close the poll out and see where we landed. By a lion's share, Petit Syrah, 93%. Spoiler alert, you guys are all absolutely correct. And I think this wine does absolute justice to not only the intensity and the flavor profile of the wine, but it also shows you that Petit Syrah, which is known for these sort of rich, mouth-ripping wines, doesn't have to be. You know, this wine has a round texture to it and a smoothness to it that almost belies the depth of color and the power. And I tip my hat to you, Nova, in taming the beast that can be Petit Syrah. And I think when people try those other Petit Syrahs, oftentimes they shut down. They go, I don't like this wine. I'm not going to be a fan of Petit Syrah. But this, I always tell people, is a great way to come back and go, wow, this is what it's all about and what it could be. And this is one of the great, and I say this with knowing the cheery, this is one of the great Petit Syrahs made in the entire state.
Thank you, Evan. Appreciate that for sure. And you know, it's what I try to get across when we're tasting this wine with other people is in exactly what Evan said. Most Petit Syrahs are so inky and so tannic, it makes you really hard, makes it very difficult to enjoy even one full glass, let alone, you know, sharing a bottle with someone. So what we're trying to get across is, of course, full expression of the varietal, you know, a dark and structurally strong wine, heavy, hearty red wine, but there's got to be balance, and basically has to translate to some degree of elegance. And it's elegance and Petit Syrah are often not in the same sentence, but I found that it's critical. If people are going to want to enjoy this varietal, you have to accentuate its more lovable characteristics, as opposed to just beating someone over the head with a glass of wine. It just doesn't work. And there's so much there. There's so much that is really underappreciated about the varietal. Historically, it's been a blender. It's gone into, you know, wines ever since it was developed in the 1800s. And it doesn't have to just disappear in a blend to build color and structure. It has a lot of standalone characteristics that are as good as really anything else out there. And you just have to kind of coax out those flavors and without, you know, making it too difficult to drink.
Absolutely. I got one question for you on that wine, which I was actually curious about too. But let me, for those people that need to run to either head out of where they're going or throw dinner on the table, just a couple of thoughts, and we'll jump back to the Q&A. And by the way, Nova and I are going to hang out for 15 or 20 minutes to answer any questions that you have, and we'll bring all of you up on screen afterwards too, which will be fun, kind of like the Brady Bunch or Hollywood Squares times 40. So first of all, thank you for tuning in. As a reward for those of you who spent time with us today, if you go into the Foppiano.com and type in MTW21, you're going to get a 15% discount off of all wines. I know I'm going to go in and do some of that myself a little bit later today. If you're feeling overwhelmed or that you've been drinking water out of a fire hose, relax, realize that you're not alone, keep it fun. And as I said earlier, nobody gets out of bed in the morning and decides they're going to run a triathlon. You got to train, you got to build, you got to work to it. So the more you do this, the better you get. If you want to and can work with our MTW structure, I promise that the curve will not be as steep as you get more and more used to the system. And for those of you who enjoyed this webinar today and want to do more and even more, we have 2 coming up at MTW, and we'll mail to you because of your being here today. One's going to be on food and wine, which I'll lead with on the 11th, talking about food and wine pairing, thoughts, theory, etc. And next month's what we call regular kit, subscription kit webinar, which will be 6 different wines from 6 different spots around the world, led by myself and 2 other Musketeer Master Sommeliers that are going to be joining us.